an artist at the peak of fame, a fan club spinning out of control, friendship, obsession, betrayal. How far can an enraged fan go? A shocking crime that rocked a generation. Music, money, jealousy, a deadly combination. Who was the woman behind the obsession? Luana Mendez. On stage, a star. Behind the scenes, dark secrets. In this episode, uncover the thin line between love and madness. On March 31st, 1995, guests at a Days Inn motel in Corpus Christi, Texas, heard two women having a heated argument. And then came a deafening shot. Just minutes later, the famous singer Luana Mendez, only 23 at the time, appeared in the lobby, her clothes drenched in blood. Hurt and terrified, her last words were Isabel, 158, referring to the former president of her fan club, one of the closest people in her short life. Back then, Tejano music was one of the hottest Latin subgenres in the States, and Luana was hailed as the Tex-Mex queen. After her death, the genre's popularity took a nosedive, leaving the Latino community heartbroken over losing one of its biggest icons. Even nearly 30 years later, the crime that took Luana's life is still considered unforgivable. How could a woman who once called the singer her daughter be responsible for ending her life? What was really lurking behind that almost obsessive fandom? Luana Mendez was born on April 16, 1971, in Texas. Her parents, Marina and Andre Mendez, already had two older kids. When Luana turned 6, her dad noticed her musical gift, her perfect timing, and an exceptional voice. Andre, a former musician from Mexico eager to get back on stage, quickly fueled his daughter's passion. In 1980, Andre quit his job at a chemical shipping company and opened a Tex-Mex restaurant called Tropicana in Lake Jackson, where Luana and her siblings, Tiago on bass and Nina on drums, used to perform. The next year, when oil prices tanked and the economy took a nosedive, the restaurant had to close. The family went bankrupt and lost their home. They moved to Corpus Christi, where Andre really pushed the band he'd formed with his kids, now called Luana and the Comets. Acting as the band's manager, he got them gigs at street corners, weddings, quinceañeras, and fairs, their main source of income. Little by little, the band started to gain traction, and travel opportunities began to roll in. Andre even refurbished an old bus nicknamed the Green Giant for their tours. In the early days, they'd perform for a meal and barely had enough cash to cover gas money. When Luana was in 8th grade, her dad pulled her out of school, which got her teachers grumbling. Still, she finished high school through correspondence at 17. In 1984, the band recorded their first LP, Luana and the Comets, with an indie label. Andre was determined that his kids play Tejano music, even though it was then a man's game, popularized nationwide by Mexican Americans. So Luana started taking elocution classes in Spanish. The LP came out, but local venues in Texas wouldn't book them because of the kids' ages, and mostly because Luana was a girl. Even with that setback, they kept at it, recording more Tejano tunes, and by 1988, they'd dropped 6 albums. In 1987, Luana snagged the Female Vocalist Award at the Tejano Music Awards, which really kicked off her career. 2 years later, she landed her first major deal with Capital EMI Latin. By the early 90s, Luana was internationally famous as a solo act, singing in both Spanish and English. That's when Isabel Torres, a die-hard fan of Tejano music who'd initially been jealous of Luana's award wins, finally took notice. In the summer of 1991, after catching a Luana concert in San Antonio with her niece, Isabel was blown away by her stage presence and instantly became a fan. Right after the gig, Isabel went on the hunt for news about the show to keep as a keepsake, but she came up empty. That's when she got the idea to start a fan club in San Antonio to promote Luana. She tried calling Andre Mendez 15 times until she finally got through. When they met, he gave the green light to create the fan club and even made Isabel the president. Soon enough, Isabel was in charge, collecting about $22 per member in exchange for promotional swag, lining up exclusive interviews with the band, putting together the newsletter, and keeping everyone posted about upcoming shows. Back then, all the fan club profits were donated to charity. Before long, Isabel even quit her job as an in-home nurse for terminal cancer patients and those with breathing issues so she could go full-time on the fan club, even though it meant a pay cut. At first, Nina was the go-between for Isabel and the Mendez family, but by December 1991, Luana finally met her dedicated admirer, and the two hit it off. On April 2, 1992, Luana tied the knot with her guitarist, Daniel Rocha, whom she'd been dating for a while. Andre wasn't too thrilled about the relationship, and that sparked plenty of conflict. By 1994, Isabel had registered over 8,000 fan club members. In January of that year, Luana launched 2 boutiques called Luana Etc. in Corpus Christi and San Antonio, both decked out with in-house beauty salons. Thanks to her hard work and close ties with the family, Isabel was promoted to manage the stores. Isabel even packed up and moved from San Antonio to Corpus Christi just to be closer to Luana. Things were cruising along nicely, until the boutique staff started complaining about Isabel's behavior. Luana couldn't believe the negative reports because whenever she visited, Isabel was all polite and helpful. Luana even went so far as to call her the most efficient assistant she'd ever had. Then, in September of that year, Luana promoted Isabel to registered agent in San Antonio, and their connection grew even closer. Isabel was given the keys to sign and cash checks, and had full access to the bank accounts linked to both the fan club and the boutiques. Luana even handed her the American Express card so she could handle business. Isabel took those responsibilities as a sign of affection, and her fandom for Luana only intensified. Her room was plastered with posters and photos of Luana, and she even set up a mini home theater to show Luana's videos for her guests. In an interview with the Dallas Morning News, several reporters commented that her devotion to Luana was bordering on the obsessive. The boutique employees were saying the same thing. Isabel was fixated on being just like Luana. She even tried to keep Luana isolated from the rest of the staff, almost controlling every little move. But Isabel insisted she was only trying to keep Luana away from trivial business hassles. Before long, Isabel started tagging along on Luana's tours and even got a spare set of keys to her house. But all that trust eventually proved to be her downfall. Not too long after, Luana met Ricardo Martinez, a doctor from Monterrey, the very place where she dreamed of opening another boutique. Ricardo's connections in Mexico made him the perfect business advisor, and soon enough, Luana was relying on him. That's when Isabel started feeling jealous of how much Luana depended on Ricardo, a sentiment that only escalated when Ricardo began sending flowers to the hotel room where Luana was crashing. Because of that, Isabel warned Luana that Ricardo might have less than honorable intentions. Even so, Luana ended up traveling to Monterrey quite a bit, often going incognito so no one would recognize her. There was even a time when Ricardo lent her several $1,000s because she was running low on cash. Not one to be left behind, Isabel also made frequent trips to Monterrey to speed up the launch of this new boutique. While there, she intimidated the seamstresses, making it clear that if they wanted to keep their jobs, they had to toe her line. But her plans were about to go off the rails forever. In January 1995, Andre started getting calls and letters from fans claiming they'd paid their fan club dues but hadn't received any of the promised goodies. At the same time, employees at both the San Antonio and Corpus Christi boutiques noticed a big spike in overdue or unpaid invoices, something Isabel couldn't explain. Isabel's own brother, Armando, even got in touch with Marcos Gomez, Luana's stylist, and spilled the beans that she was swindling money from the club. Marcos passed that info on to Andre. Though Armando said he was furious with his sister, he never publicly detailed why he'd filed the complaint. After digging into it, Andre uncovered that Isabel had misappropriated $60,000 by using forged checks from both the fan club and the stores. On March 9th, he pulled Luana and Nina into a meeting at Q Productions to confront Isabel. He laid out all the evidence of her financial misdeeds, but all she could do was sit there in dead silence. Even when Andre threatened to call the cops if she didn't produce proof refuting those allegations, Isabel stayed mum. When asked why the fans hadn't gotten their freebies for paying up, she fired back that they were just trying to score some free souvenirs. Then she abruptly bailed on the meeting, and Andre banned her from contacting Luana ever again. Despite everything, Luana didn't want to end the friendship. She still saw Isabel as key to the success of her clothing line in Mexico. Besides, Luana still held onto important records and bank statements needed for tax filings. So Isabel kept working for her, but it wasn't long before Andre discovered that she had even opened a bank account for the fan club under her sister's name, Maria Elida. Isabel's excuse was that the bank wouldn't let her open an account in her own name, though she never said why. Andre eventually figured out that she was signing bogus checks so she could cash them and pocket the money. By the time he tried to get the fan club bank statements, they'd simply vanished. On top of that, Andre found a handwritten note from Isabel claiming that Maria Elida had to close the account because of some big problem. In the same note, she mentioned that a club member named Ana Perales had been sent to the bank to drop off a $3,000 deposit, but it never happened and the woman was untraceable. When Andre grilled Isabel about it, she denied any knowledge. He even asked why she was trusting a complete stranger over the club's treasurer, finally concluding that Perales probably didn't even exist. In March 1995, Andre told Isabel she was no longer welcome in Luana's business affairs. Then, on the 10th of that month, Luana and her ex-girlfriend got into a phone fight. The call ended with Luana hanging up and telling her husband she couldn't trust Isabel anymore. Luana promptly removed Isabel's name from the boutique's bank account and replaced her as fan club president. The very next day, Isabel headed over to an arms store in San Antonio and bought herself a Taurus 85 revolver, .38 caliber with a shortened barrel, along with hollow point rounds, designed to hit harder than standard ammo. She told the guy at the counter she needed protection doing her job as an in-home nurse since some of her patients' relatives had threatened her. On March 13th, Isabel met up with her lawyer and drafted her resignation from the Mendez business. That same day, she drove over to Corpus Christi and checked into the Sandy Motel. She called Luana to set up a meeting, using traffic as an excuse, and suggested they rendezvous in a parking lot about 40 kilometers outside of town. When they met up, Luana told Isabel she could still handle her business in Mexico, since she wasn't ready to cut ties just yet. That's when Isabel whipped out the gun she had bought. Luana asked her to get rid of it and promised she'd protect her from any accusations from her dad. According to Andre, that conversation probably stopped Isabel from going full-on homicidal in that moment. The next day, Isabel returned the gun to the store, claiming her dad had actually given her a .22 caliber as a sort of protection for dealing with a patient's family member. Then, on March 26th, she swiped a sample perfume and more bank statements from Luana in Mexico. After that, she joined Luana on a trip to Tennessee to finish recording a song. While there, Luana noticed some bank records were missing and asked Isabel to return them once they got back to Texas. The following day, Isabel went ahead and bought the same pistol again, and arranged to meet up with Luana in a motel room. She specifically requested Luana come alone. But any plans Isabel had for offing Luana were thwarted when word got out about the singer's arrival and fans started showing up. There were just too many witnesses. On March 29th, Isabel called Dr. Martinez, saying she'd been abused. Ricardo sent someone to check out the motel room where Isabel was staying, but by the time they arrived, she was long gone. Then, on March 30th, Isabel checked into a Days Inn motel. This time, in room 158. She called Luana and claimed she'd been abused, urging Luana to come to her room alone. At 10 p.m. that night, Luana drove to the hotel with her husband, Daniel, who waited in the truck while Luana went in alone to Isabel's room so she could get back some business documents that Isabel still held. Once there, Luana noticed Isabel's clothes were torn and that she sported several scratches that looked self-inflicted. On the ride back, Luana mentioned that Isabel still hadn't handed over the bank statements she needed. Not long after, Isabel called Luana again, insisting she was bleeding from some abuse and begging Luana to take her to a hospital that very night. Daniel told Luana it was best not to go out alone, so Luana agreed to meet up with Isabel the next morning. Luana then told a staff member at the boutique she was about to fire Isabel. Worried about her ex-president's erratic behavior, she even had the employee follow her home that night. At 7:30 a.m. on Friday, March 31st, Luana left home heading to the motel where Isabel was staying. Once there, Isabel again claimed she'd been abused in Mexico. Luana took her to Doctors Regional Hospital, where the doctors found no signs of abuse, just a bit of bleeding. Though they did note Isabel seemed clearly depressed. Luana snapped that Isabel's previous claim of heavy bleeding the day before didn't add up. On the way back in Luana's truck, Luana told Isabel that the best move was to take a break from each other, if nothing else, to avoid pissing off her dad. At 10 a.m., Luana was scheduled to record the song Un Never Falling Love at Q Productions, but she never showed up. Andre called Daniel to ask where his daughter was. Daniel got in touch with her, and she admitted she'd forgotten the appointment because she was dealing with something else. She promised to hit the studio later, and that would be the last call Luana ever took, and the last time anyone in her family would speak with her. Meanwhile, back in the motel room, Luana and Isabel got into a blazing fight over business matters. Guests started complaining about the loud ruckus coming from the room. Luana yelled at her ex-friend that she couldn't trust her anymore and demanded the return of her financial documents. Then Luana hurled Isabel's briefcase, which held those bank statements, onto the bed. That's when she spotted the gun and made a mad dash out of the room, grabbing both the briefcase and a cell phone that Isabel had given her. Around 11:40 a.m., Isabel pointed the revolver at Luana, who was standing with her back turned, barely more than half a meter away. With one shot fired at the lower part of Luana's right shoulder, a major artery was hit, and massive bleeding ensued. Barely clinging to life, Luana bolted toward the motel lobby, hustling past the pool area and restaurant, leaving a trail of blood behind her. In the scramble, she dropped her briefcase, phone, and that iconic Chanel bag. Staff and guests saw her clutching her chest, hollering for help, while Isabel chased after her, still waving the revolver and hurling insults. Then, as if nothing had happened, Isabel strolled back to her room. Meanwhile, Isabel rushed over to her red pickup, still clutching the gun, and tried to speed off from the motel parking lot. Some onlookers figured she was heading to Q Productions, maybe to take a swing at Andre Mendez. But a cop spotted her shady behavior, jumped out of his cruiser with his own piece drawn, and ordered her to get out of the vehicle immediately. Realizing she couldn't make a clean getaway, Isabel parked close to other cars and ended up blocked in by a police cruiser. With officers surrounding her, Isabel started screaming, "I can't believe I hurt my best friend," and even pointed the gun at her own head, threatening to off herself. Meanwhile, paramedics rushed to the scene to help Luana. One of the first responders, Richard Fredrickson, discovered that Luana had taken a bullet to the upper right side of her chest. When he checked her vitals, there were only feeble muscle twitches, no pulse, no breath. She was rushed over to Corpus Christi Memorial Hospital, arriving at about 12:05 p.m. in a critical state. Dr. Louise Helkins, who took charge in the ER, couldn't detect any brain activity or independent breathing, and Luana had lost a hell of a lot of blood. An hour later, after all attempts to resuscitate had failed, Luana Mendez was officially pronounced dead. All this while, Isabel hunkered down in her pickup for nearly 10 hours in a tense standoff, with reporters and a crowd of onlookers gathering around. A SWAT team and crisis negotiators eventually showed up, and agents Larry John and Isaac Valencia got on a dedicated phone line set up right next to the vehicle to talk her down. At one point during a rare lull, Isabel admitted that she had even pointed the gun at herself, threatening to end it all, and claimed Luana had tried to talk her out of it. According to Isabel, when Luana opened the door to leave, she told Isabel to close it again. And that's when the shot went off, by accident. After about 6 hours of tense negotiations, Isabel finally agreed to surrender. But as she stepped out of her truck and saw a cop aiming a rifle at her, she panicked, bolted back to her vehicle, grabbed the revolver, and once again pointed it at her own head. It wasn't until 9:30 p.m. that Isabel finally gave in and turned herself over to the authorities. She was taken to the Corpus Christi Central Police Station, where Detective Ray Rivera grilled her, and she waived her right to have a lawyer present. At first, Isabel admitted she'd fired at Luana, claiming it was accidental, but soon after, her story flipped. When pressed a second time, she said that Luana had bolted for the door as soon as she saw the gun, and she couldn't even say for sure when the shot went off. Investigators later rifled through room 158 at the motel and found extra ammunition, the murder weapon, and some of Isabel's personal belongings. Every witness present during Luana's final moments identified Isabel as the shooter. A few hours later, at a press conference, police spokesperson Ken Bonds and Andre Mendez explained that the killing might have had something to do with Luana's plan to cut ties with Isabel. Luana's death sent shockwaves across the nation, especially among the Latino community, which saw her as a cultural icon. Thousands of people held impromptu vigils in Corpus Christi, San Antonio, and other Texas cities. Local TV stations even halted regular programming to keep the news rolling, and the impact of Luana's passing was compared in the media to that of legends like John Lennon or JFK. On April 3rd, Luana's official funeral was held at Seaside Memorial Park, with around 600 people in attendance. Luana's boutiques soon turned into makeshift shrines, littered with flowers, handwritten notes, and memorials from fans. Yet, not everyone was on board. Some critics just couldn't grasp her cultural importance, and there were even a few tasteless jeers. In the months following the incident, Isabel faced a barrage of threats from the public, and even from fellow inmates after being held without bail. The justice system kept her isolated in pretrial detention, under constant watch given the high risk of retaliation or self-harm. By October 1995, her trial finally got underway in a Houston courtroom far from Corpus Christi, so as not to stir up the local passions. Represented by public defender Douglas Tinker, Isabel faced strong witness testimonies and rock-solid evidence from the prosecution. After weeks of a grueling trial, Isabel Torres was found guilty of premeditated murder and slapped with a life sentence, with only a slim chance of parole after serving 30 years. Ever since her incarceration, Isabel has found life extremely rough. isolated from other inmates, and transferred from one prison to another for safety reasons. In December 2024, as she approached the minimum time required, Isabel officially filed for parole. That set off a firestorm of public outrage, especially among fans, family members, and Latino cultural figures, who argued that letting her out would be a slap in the face to justice and Luana Mendez's memory. Even today, Isabel frequently claims she's ready to get back to a normal life, at times even saying she'd love to work with other celebs like Shakira, longing to share the same bond she once had with Luana. And she still insists she's innocent, maintaining that things went down way differently than what everyone's heard, and that she only bought the gun because she was thinking of taking her own life. And that's where the saga stands, with the public still debating every detail, especially with her formal parole hearing scheduled for March 2025.